if four fingers point at you, it's time to say your name, right? So JM brings us out. He says, I'm JM Erlinson. Then it's your turn. Then it's my turn. And then bye-bye.
And you can say I'm before your name as well. You don't have to say Mark McGregor.
You can, yes.
Because that's what people have been doing, and it's weird.
Yeah, or you can say I've been, or I will be, or whatever, right?
different styles of introduction. Roland just yells his name at the top of his lungs. I say it gently, and you can come up with something in the middle.
That's the Canadian way, you know. Welcome to the What's Your Baseline podcast. In this show, we talk about our experiences and lessons learned in enterprise architecture and business process management. What's Your Baseline is designed to be for everyone. Newbies who are just getting started with these topics, organizations who want to improve their EA and BPM groups and the value they get from it, as well as practitioners who want to get a different perspective and care about the discipline.
Each episode will tackle different key topics, providing context, background, best practices, and stories from the road, inviting you to learn from our challenges and successes, and demonstrating key tools to help you set up your practice and get the most out of it.
I'm your host, Roland Wolt, and I'm joined today by my co-host, JM Erlinson. Hey, JM, how are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good, Roland. It's been a heck of a week. I'm actually behind the scenes. I run a charity and a festival that is kicking off this week. We had this week in Toronto declared the week of a cappella. I know that's another sort of side project of my life, but I'm a performing artist and vocalist and a representative for the art form of a cappella here in Canada and all over the world. So I'm really excited, but I am also very tired.
Oh, and I thought you were in the hardworking man business now, because we're talking about enterprise mining today, and you have your shovel ready to get stuff done.
Oh yeah, I need to go back into the mines. I love how we call it mining. I mean, if you think about a discipline that's more associated with hard physical labor and really tangible goods, and then you switch that to process mining and you move completely away from the physical space. I love it. It feels almost like double speak or whatever, but you know what? Honestly, the outcomes can't be more clear to me, but I would love to get some insight from our new friend or good friend, depending on whether or not you're a listener or the folks talking on the podcast. And Roland, I'd love for you to do this because you've known him a lot longer than I. Tell me a little bit about our guest today.
Yeah, so all that confusion that you have, JM, and hopefully the audience doesn't have, will be solved because we invited Mark McGregor, who in business process management circles, I think is a well-known, well-valued commodity, because he has written so many books about process management and has been a Gartner analyst and all those wonderful stations on his CV. And he brings a lot of experience and perspective to the topic of enterprise mining to us. So welcome, Mark, to our little show here.
Thanks, Roland. Thanks, JM. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. So I've been following the show with great interest, and I know that as we get into today's topic, then we're going to be overlapping on last week's topic. So that's going to be interesting because the connection between the mining and the simulation and all those things is going to be fascinating. So thanks for inviting me.
Well, we like to talk about evidence-based decision-making in process. That's the idea. And evidence is expensive, but mining is one way of getting evidence. I would not say painlessly, but I would say maybe as inexpensively and as accurately as I've seen, because otherwise, oh boy, how are we gathering that evidence? But before we get started, I think Roland and I love to get to know our guests a little better and to introduce them to our audience. So give yourself an introduction, my friend. Tell the audience about who are you, what are your experiences, where do you come from? Set up sort of your bona fides for our audience.
Yes, I mean, I guess in terms of the relevance to what we're talking about today, I've been involved in the analysis and design market for 27, 28 years now, working with or for most of the vendors that those listening will know, and a whole bunch of others that have been and gone long before they were even born, never mind started out in our industry. So whether that was through the case tools and the structure analysis and design, object-oriented tools, In fact, the original BPR tools of the early and mid 90s. So, I watch all this stuff around things like BPMN and UPN and all that thing and think, well, okay, we had IDEF 0 and IDEF 3 and they did pretty good things. So I'm afraid I go back to the IDEF methodologies, and I know when we joke with you guys and we're talking, back into the old days of the IDS world of Aris, long before Software AG, then, hey, we were talking and, I was competing with Aris when they were still using a distributor in the UK. They hadn't even created IDS UK at that point.
Wow.
So going through all of those things, but also morphing that into the enterprise architecture space. A Gartner analyst at the time, Jim Duggan, very good friend of mine, long since retired. He very kindly credited me in my days at Popkin of actually creating the enterprise modeling market through work that we did at Popkin, which is relevant to where we are today, because in those days we were selling process modeling tools, structure analysis and design modeling tools, object-oriented modeling tools, and it was all separate. And what we were finding was that, hey, we would go and lose, say in an OO scenario to someone like Rational in UML, or we might lose in data modeling, or indeed some of the BPR to Erwin at the time and Embarcadero, and we might go and lose to a company which most of you will never heard of called Select Software in the structured. And what we were realizing is whenever we sent out product to be evaluated, there was always another problem. So someone would say, well, actually, I know we were looking at you for structured, but we chose this one because we decided to go OO. And so I said, well, actually, hang on a minute. We've got data, we've got process, and we've got systems. These are all part of the same thing. And that's where I was first introduced to John Zachman and why we created the Enterprise Architecture Suite.
Yeah, that makes absolute sense. But unfortunately, I have to report it's still not widely distributed. You still have the separation, at least in my mind, between process and IT architecture and all these type of things. But before we get into the meats, maybe let our listeners know a little bit more about you. Who are you as a person? What are your hobbies? What are your interests? What are your bucket list items and all these things, except obviously talking with us on this wonderful podcast here?
Well, the first thing is I don't believe in bucket lists. Ooh. So a word of advice for you guys, and indeed as someone once told me, if you only had 6 months to live, you've been to the doctor and he said, you've only got 6. What would you do different to that which you currently do today? And the advice is, whatever it is, you should start doing it. Because the sad part is, for most of us, we never know when we've only got 6 months to live. So that bucket list is shouldn't be a bucket list. It's things I'm going to do, the things that I'm doing. And I'm very, very fortunate that most of the things that I can think of that I would like to do, I've either done or I'm doing now. Okay, getting my golf handicap down. I don't know whether I'll live long enough to get my golf handicap down to a level that I want. But hey, that's what I'm going to be spending a lot of the next 12 months doing, because, as you guys know, I'm transitioning into a point where I'm about to move away from this world of work into an alternative universe, as it were. But the other pieces are that, we talk about modeling, analysis, and design. So for me, fundamentally, it's all about change. And I love change. Now, when I worked, 15 years ago in the tooling space, it became very apparent that it didn't really matter whose tool anyone bought. They still weren't able to get value. So they would all say the same thing. I'm not getting the value that I expected out of the tools that I bought. It doesn't matter whose the tool is. It's not about how good the tool. It's about they didn't actually understand the skills of analysis and design. And they didn't necessarily know how to ask the questions, which of course is very topical when everyone's talking about GPT and ChatGPT and the such like. And I was reading just last week, is it going to kill business analysis? Like, well, actually, no, because business analysis is all about knowing how to ask the right questions. Wow, hang on a minute. We've now got a technology which relies upon the skills of people being able to ask the right questions. Mm-hmm. So that took me into a whole different sphere, which is something that I've come to love and and teach is on neurolinguistic programming. So I became a master practitioner and a trainer in neurolinguistic programming. Other things that many people don't know about me is I'm actually a trained energy healer, because part of NLP, as listeners may know, is around trance and hypnosis. Well, Richard Bandler, who was one of the creators and did a lot of training with Richard, actually said that he learned more about trance and hypnosis from the shamans of South America and the gurus of India. So I have, and for anyone that's listening will know, I have what I call my other family in Chennai. I have a whole bunch of friends and very, very close friends and pretty well family who have given me and shared with me some of the most amazing experiences. I've been to places that tourists just don't go. I've met gurus that just don't meet the public, and taught and use energy healing. So energy healing is one of those facets that I love.
That's really cool. Actually, fun fact, my stepfather has worked with Reiki. So I think we have a little bit of a connection through that, and that's really cool. It must be fascinating to get access to spaces where other people don't necessarily get a chance to come in and experience them, because you have to be part of the community, involved in these activities.
So now I'm curious when the two of you will start your own book, how you get those concepts being married to process management. I'm happy to be the test reader.
Well, remember, if you want to change, you've got to be the change.
Ooh, that's deep.
And if you look at it in a different way, and again, it comes up from the Indian or Asian philosophy, is that everything is just energy. Mm-hmm. So actually, if you want to change something, all you've got to do is change the energy, and the change will occur. So it goes very, very deep in terms of that stuff.
So we have energy healing and process mining. I dig it, and I think that takes us to the process mining side of things. If that's all right, Roland, we're going to get moving on this, because process mining, we've had a bunch of shows on process mining with the What's Your Baseline podcast. We love it. We think there's a lot to talk about, a lot to analyze. I mean, there's whole podcasts on just process mining, and we see it as a hot topic. But personally, I feel like a lot of people don't really understand it. It's become the latest 3-letter acronym for a lot of organizations, particularly for a lot of senior leaders, where they say, okay, so I heard about process mining. Let's go do some mining stuff. We just make the mining work for our business and get it better. Let's just start with first and foremost, your perspective on the marketplace and on the marketplace's approach to process mining. Do you see this as another flash in the pan, technology-driven sales cycle, or do you see it as a really lasting practice that we're just getting off the ground with? Because we see a ton of M&A stuff that's going on right now. We see a ton of market activity. What's underneath that? What's the core energy of this discipline? And is it good? And is it something that we can see as a growth market, real growth market?
Wow. So much packed into that.
Yeah, I ask complicated or multi-stage questions. My apologies, but I just need your perspective. Let's start.
Yeah, so there's a number of different ways I think we should look at it. And one of the lenses that I use to look at process mining, and particularly when we think about it in terms of the M&A activity, is I liken it to object request brokers in the early 90s. Now, of course, most of the people listening are way too young and never heard of object request brokers. But when the object management group were creating their interoperability standard, they created the CORBA standard called object request brokers. Now, Microsoft went off and did their own way of doing it, because that was what Microsoft did. But everyone else was going after that. And there were a number of smaller vendors all creating commercial implementations of the object request broker standard. Yet only one vendor actually made money. And by making money, I mean actually managed to exit at a reasonable sum. Because what we realized at that time, when it came to object request brokers, was this middleware stuff is the stuff that everybody wants and nobody wants to pay for. So that's one parallel. And I think we're seeing a lot of that with process mining, where we're seeing a lot of hype. We've got a lot of people saying, wow, it's being used extensively all over the place. Well, actually, I'm going to argue that barely 10% of organizations that could be using it are using it, in my opinion. And I don't disagree that some of those organizations are large and they spend a lot of money, but let's not kid ourselves, still a very small percentage. And we can come back in a minute to, well, why might that be and what else would happen? But the other part that's similar to object request brokers is those small vendors that were bought in that M&A thing became part of a different ecosystem. So I think that if you look at the acquisitions by Pega, by Appian, by SAP, and there will be others, what we're really seeing is the underlying mining technology from a monitoring and process monitoring and process intelligence is immensely valuable on top of a system. We know that part of the challenge, and we'll talk about challenges, is that connectivity with systems. But if you are a package vendor, whether you're a Pega or an Appian or SAP, doesn't matter. Wow, if you could use this technology on top of your application and give your customers insights that they were never able to get before, and they don't have to worry about data integration issues because you've done all that. It's your system, it's closed.
Yeah.
Then that stuff becomes wow. And I think that's part of where it's hot and where the scrabbling for M&A is other vendors looking to say, well, gee, who else has got a system? But it also means, and I was working with a large end user recently and trying to explain to them that said, look, it's not a case of whether you're going to buy process mining, because I can tell you now, in my opinion, in 5 years' time, you will probably have 4 or 5 process mining solutions in your landscape, and you won't even know because it was part of your ERP. It was part of your XY. It was just another piece of functionality or capability within a different package. So I think in one respect, we've got that going on, and that means that some of the issues will go away. It makes it really challenging for the analysts analyzing the market, because if an XYZ package vendor says, I've now got 1,000 customers using process mining because they embedded it, no one can contradict it. But we can all sit there and say, yeah, they're probably not all using it, but there's no facts. So we lose that fact to contradict.
The question is also, because that's one type of M&A that we see. The other one is what you see like the firm that I work for, and you and I work together, where business process management tool vendors buy this type of software to extend their offering. Right. And the pitch that we have is obviously we provide tools for all phases of the life cycle, from discovery with mining and operational intelligence to process design and simulation to automation. And by the way, once you've automated it, you mine it again. Right. So the full life cycle that you would support here. What's your perspective on that type of the market, on that type of vendor? Is it the true market, or is it a side market, or what would be your perspective on that?
No, that's a great question. And that, as you say, from the work that, for anyone on the podcast, we'll save you the bother of going into LinkedIn. So I worked with Roland a little bit doing some consulting when I was doing some consulting with iGrafx, which is where they made the acquisition of LogPicker and rolled that in. Currently, I'm working with Apromore. Apromore, by the way, is slightly different in terms of they're a process mining vendor that's added process modeling into their stack. And then, just for the sake of completeness, then, we've got those perspectives. And I think we're going to see more of that. And Roland, that I believe in that connectivity because from my days at Signavio, when we first introduced the process intelligence product at Signavio, it was all about saying we need to combine facts with feelings. So, just to the two of you and, the three of us have all got that analysis and design background. We're not dogmatic. We're not saying, as some leading academics would suggest, that process mining now replaces process modeling. You don't need to do traditional process discovery anymore. It's a load of old rubbish. The fact is that I've got a lot of human to human processes, and I need traditional style process capture workshops and interviews.
And not only that, once you've done your analysis, either subjective with your SMEs or objective with your data, you need to come up with suggestions how to improve that process. So you create your future state, right? And you need that model for communication purposes, for simulation purposes, for blueprinting, whatever, right? And I think what I see, but I'm biased, I see that shortcut that some vendors do and say, oh yeah, you just need the mining and then everything else drives from there. You can automate in our stack. Why would you do that middle step? And I think people miss out, and are wrongly advised of taking out that little step.
Which brings us back to where we said at the beginning, how this week's conversation overlaps with last week's conversation. So whether we look at iGrafx or whether we look at Apromore, we can't fail to add in that third piece of the jigsaw, which is the simulation. Because, okay, I've captured my current state, whether I've captured the facts through mining or the feelings through traditional modeling, doesn't matter. I've now got some view of my current state. I'm going to conduct some form of analysis. Now, whether that's automated analysis or whether it doesn't matter, I'm going to do some sort of analysis on what I found. And I think I want to make a change. Now, all three of us have been around in the market for long enough. And, when we go, whether we go back to the Popkin days or originally IDS days, then both of those products were strong on simulation at that time.
And the idea, the promise, was that this technology would be a digital crystal ball. The most valuable thing you can have in business. You see the future. You make a decision with full visibility of what that decision will actually do to your business. But I think that there's a lot that's missed in there. It feels like a false promise in a lot of ways because there's a bunch of clouds in that crystal ball, which is the human element. So we talk about the full life cycle. What I really would think about is it's holistic medicine for your company. You have to see the whole picture, and the human body is perhaps the most important resource a company can have. The human beings behind the screens, the executors who are making things happen in real life. And process mining offers a false sense of security. And simulation based on process mining is just compounding false sense of security on false sense of security into the point where your future state doesn't actually give you a real picture. It gives you maybe even a completely different picture. That's what I always worry about that.
Yeah, so I think that's a great point. So let me just rewind back slightly. So when we were trying to sell simulation, it was kind of hard because to do good simulation, you needed to know a lot of parameters. So, LANA in the UK, which of course is, I don't know whether they still use it, which is what LANA Software AG licensed, as opposed to the discrete event model that iGrafx and Apromore have done. But the simulation would produce great results, but it needed a lot of work to input it. And I think this is where it becomes so exciting. And I'm sure that Roland's seeing it in iGrafx as we're seeing it, is that the amount of the parameters, simulation parameters that can be populated through process mining makes simulation far more viable today than ever it was. Because we don't have to think about, well, what's the distribution curve or what's the interval arrival time? We can actually programmatically say what the actual arrival time is. But to your point, it still needs the other aspects. And that's where, for the three of us looking at this, so I'm currently working with Apromore, Roland's there at iGrafx, you're there at Software AG. Actually, we're representing the three vendors that all come at it and saying, it's not just about the mind model. It's about the facts and the feelings and the simulation. And therefore, we're just as likely to be adding in the human aspects as the robot. So when we look at the simulation, the simulation is saying, well, actually, you know what? It's just three more people. It's not a robot. It doesn't make sense. We're going to get a more effective outcome with additional resource, not a robot.
I agree. but I also like to play devil's advocate, because one could say, well, you three guys, you're the old guard, the old school. What do you know? Now technology is there and it's super easy and you can skip those steps. And we all know, at least here in America, everybody wants to take the shortcut, right? And get the rewards without doing the hard work. So I think that marketing message resonates with a lot of people and they're willing to spend the money on it. But to come to that topic, what have you seen in the past, how these new technologies have been adopted? You indicated a little bit that you think it's about 10% of the organizations who use it. I have to admit, from my perspective, the whole market is still fresh. I still give talks and I do a show of hands in there and say, oh, who of you is currently doing process mining or any of that stuff? Yeah, it's like, whatever, 2 hands that go up in a room of 50 people, so it's very little. What are your observations in that market and where do you think this will go?
Yeah, so I think it comes back to JM's comment earlier on when he said about, relating it to traditional mining. And so, okay, yeah, well, traditional mining is seen as dangerous. I mean, never mind that the money that we're pulling out the ground is great, but I often talk about the fact we confuse prospecting with mining, because a lot of the talk around process mining is, well, it could this and it could that and it might do this and it might do. Okay, it might, but tell me what it's actually going to do. And of course, the challenge is when any of us go and talk to a customer, or even when the customer, we don't know what it can do. I mean, there are vendors out there that say, well, we are taking X, Y, Z out of your procure to pay. Well, there's no guarantee that you're going to, I don't know a vendor yet that's going to give me a money back guarantee. They don't, because we don't know. We can say that based on other experiences, these are the sorts of things. Now, a very good friend of mine, Andrew Perry, that I used to work with at ABBYY, who'd probably make a very good guest for you for another occasion. When you look at we did a lot of work, he and I, around compliance and the application of process mining in compliance, but also extending that way before the ChatGPT into the AI and ethics. So imagine now that you're a bank and you lend money and you're in the US. You built that system 20 years ago. Well, all this new regulation that's coming in Europe and is heading certainly in Canada doesn't ask you to check your bias just on new systems you're building today. So it's not just a case of, well, I've got to make sure this new system doesn't bias on gender or race or location. No. It actually says all your decisions. So the fact that you built a system in assembler in the 60s and are still running it, oh, well, how do you find out? Because you've got no documentation. You'll be lucky if any of the coders are probably still alive, never mind working with you. So suddenly it says, oh, actually, I have to use mining technology because I need to uncover what's going on.
So it's more than just technical debt. This is like obligation debt, where you've put yourself at regulatory risk by simply existing for a long time. And you need to have a system like mining to be able to allow yourself to come into alignment with some sort of efficacy rather than, I'm assuming you can throw bodies at this all day long and maybe you'll only get 90% of the way there, even after all that expenditure. That's a pretty good value for this system, even at a very just at the faceplate, right? That's what you see. But tell me a little bit more underlying that. So once you get it in, let's say this is the first hit of process mining, if you want to use a terrible analogy. Tell me what happens when you get hooked.
Okay, so the first thing is, to your point, and it's good that you. So when I talked to you guys originally, is that I think about it as enterprise mining, because if you use that in an example I've just given you, just reversing the program logic, because let's be really clear, process mining is really just uncovering transaction chains and program logic. They may or may not be processes, but the word process gets put all over the place. But if you think about those examples, what I've actually mined is a whole wealth of stuff. So I may have uncovered an accidental process, or it may be a real process, depending on whether I designed it that way. I've uncovered the fact that actually the business doesn't operate the way I thought it was. Well, that's kind of useful to know, whether I want to fix it or adjust it, my choice. But more to the point, I've just mined a whole bunch of other stuff, like decisions. Oh, wow. Because, if you think about it, when we were doing our earlier incarnations of analysis and design of a process, for all three of us, we know that everyone talks about going in and doing this for the process and that for the, but actually we all know that the quickest way of speeding up and improving most processes, it's dangerous to say most, but I'll do it, was actually to eliminate stupid rules or stupid decisions, or to update or refresh decisions. When we put this system in 1995, we said we had to make sure we had manager approval for every expense over $50. Well, hang on a minute. Inflation says, we've never updated or refreshed. So the quickest way to analyze how to take out friction, take out cost, improve a process is actually question the decisions.
Yeah, I think this is a very, very interesting question. We're going to dig deeper into that topic in part 2 of our show today. But since we're talking almost for half an hour now, I'd like to give our listeners a little break and send them into a short musical interlude with a call to action. And to be quite honest, I'm asking a similar question that we've asked before in other podcasts about mining technology. What have you seen in your organization in regards to the adoption, not the benefits, which we will talk about as well, or the promises, but in regards to adoption of it? Are you looking at mining technology just for your processes, or, as Mark just said, also for other areas, which I found very interesting and is the next step? But now I stop talking and we give you a couple of seconds with music from our good friends Jeremy Bowles, and we meet each other in part 2.
Love won't let you down, won't let you down. Yeah, hey, I need your love, won't let you down. Hey, I need your love, won't let you down, won't let you down.
All right, we've taken a bit of a break to listen to some amazing music, but now we're going to talk about our part 2. We always say the how. And Mark, we are convinced, obviously Roland and I are acolytes of the Church of Process Mining. However, for everyone else on the line, making this real, making this actually actionable is a really big challenge. Getting there. It seems like a lot for a lot of organizations, or they jump into it with really simple things that don't actually make a difference. Let's talk about sustainable, like scalable enterprise mining. Where do we start? And how do we make sense of the technology landscape, the ways of working we're going to need to introduce, and ultimately our process, our path forward to make enterprise mining a reality?
Sure. So, obviously, one size doesn't fit all. So the first thing to think about is, are you thinking about leveraging mining for the organization, or are you sold, biased, being convinced by, I'm just going to try a project over here and then we'll see how it goes? For me, I want to take the enterprise approach. And I say that on the basis that there are vendors out there that would say, look, you're going to go after this $10 million, $100 million problem. Well, in my experience, there's relatively few companies with those tens and 50s and $100 million problems. And they've got a lot of different ways of solving that, so it's a pretty tough sell. However, if you're a global 5,000 organization, then I'm pretty sure that you have a whole host of $1 million problems. So, hang on a minute. Yeah, so instead of thinking about a product or a tool to solve a problem, then think about it that says, well, actually, can we invest in a platform that can solve a range of our $1 million problems? And we might pick one, obviously, to prove the scenario. But for me, so the first thing is I look at it and say, well, I don't mind whether you're coming at it from operational excellence, customer excellence, risk and compliance, technology transformation, or business transformation. And for me, pretty well, all of the initiatives that go on in organizations fall into those 5 buckets. In every one of those, what do we need? We need better fact-based information so that we can make smarter decisions faster. And we need that information delivered as an actionable insight so we can actually do something. So a little bit of that, reverse psychology that says, well, if we accept those are the 5 big buckets that you're working with, that's your challenge. I'm not going to sell you process mining. I'm just going to simply ask you the question, well, how do you currently do it? And is what you're doing now delivering all the results that you're hoping for? And in most cases, the answer, of course, is no. So now it becomes well, why are we arguing about whether process mining is good, bad, or indifferent? It's like, well, why wouldn't you try it? Because the one thing you know is you've been doing what you've been doing for a long time, and it ain't delivering the expected results. Therefore, you've got to do something different.
I think that process transformation has an evolution curve within technology similar to a lot of other evolution curves, right? Remember when power windows were a novelty and then they became a standard and then no one talks about them anymore? While doing enterprise process transformation with process mining is currently a novelty, or maybe it's now becoming a standard. I mean, I'm seeing the possibility that this just becomes the practice, the standard for everybody, and no one talks about it anymore. Of course you do process transformation with fact-based insights. Of course you use process mining.
Yeah, I mean, I guess where I would word it slightly differently, JM, is that, and I can understand you injecting the word process, I would come back and say, look, it's a business transformation. It's not a process project. This is a business transformation. So if I'm in the auto industry in Europe, then just simply thinking about transforming my process for making cars isn't going to help me, because this is a business transformation, because I've fundamentally got to change from making combustion propelled cars to electrically propelled cars.
So then I have a question about that, because that seems very far away from the conventional approach to process mining. The ability to do a business pivot, to talk about, new market opportunities, to talk about being able to deliver different services, different products to your customers, be able to activate different channels. How do you connect a real, true business transformation with enterprise mining?
Yeah. So if we think about it, then as we make that pivot, we're going to want to audit the processes we've got, because there are processes that are going to go away because they're going to be irrelevant. There are processes that may carry forward into our new world, some of which may need just simply tuning to get better performance. Others may need completely re-engineering. So we could say that the changing industry, we could say the old order to cash, we've ordered it, and the old order to cash doesn't work in the new world because we're in an ARR world or something else that's fundamentally different. So actually, no amount of fine-tuning that old process is going to work. But, we don't need to start from scratch. We could take the old process and re-engineer it for the new world. So it becomes a choice. Do we ditch it and create new? Do we tune it, or do we re-engineer it?
And I also think at least the three of us are obviously biased coming from process companies, because that's what we sell, right? I'm 100% with Mark. I think the bigger thing is the change of the business outcome. right? And everything else falls into place. Technology supports it, strategy figures out the best way going forward, yada, yada, yada. And process is just one part of it. And that's why I find the whole topic of enterprise mining so interesting, because that has more than just process. And I don't see, at least currently, I don't see the vendors going down that path. But Mark, maybe you can enlighten us and spill some beans.
Yeah, and I think that you raise a great point, Roland, which is where I was about to go with JM, which is when I talked about the customer excellence. So think about that mining of the customer journey and understanding customers' journeys. And I don't mean the customer journey through my system. Okay. In an agile world, the customer journeys, in my opinion, has been used and abused. And actually those are user journeys. So, journeys and journey modeling, journey mapping is an amazing technique, but often people talk about everything as a customer journey as opposed to splitting it out and saying, no, this is an employee journey through how they get onboarded or retired. This is a user journey through a system. This is not understanding the customer journey, because if I understand the customer's journey regarding transportation, then I suddenly realize that actually I shouldn't be renting cars. I should be doing Uber, or this is where I should put my scooters, because I'm looking at the customer's journey to go from A to B, or the customer's journey to acquire something, and not just simply grabbing a simple buyer's journey by actually understanding. And a lot of the current stuff can be mined. So some of that input can be mined. It does require old school modeling as well. But, customer journeys, we've got processes. We talked about decisions.
And when you look at the customer journey as a real journey rather than a user journey, to me, that bulk of work, the hardest part of that is harmonizing it with the data, because now you're getting only half the story from the user actions in your systems that you're able to see with the data. You need to complete the tail. And more than ever, that is a very human process. And harmonizing that with data seems like not a new skill, but certainly an adaptation of traditional discovery skills, because you have the weight of evidence, and then you have the weight of experience. And how do they become the same story? So tell me about your experience with that. How does technology enable that? And how does practice make that real?
Yeah. So it's actually very easy today.
Okay, great.
So I'm just saying it's very easy because, increasingly more modern tools are including journeys and processes in the same thing, which means that we can actually connect the processes to the journeys. So connect the touch points so we get that connection so we can see where we get in the way. But also, if you think about traditional process analysis and design tools, the fact that they're adding in the capabilities around journey means that it's already providing every business analyst or every process analyst with the technology to capture those things. And to your earlier comments, is increasing their value to the organization. That says, well, even if you're going to take away some of that process discovery that I used to do, and you're now going to give me mining to do those parts, that's great, because actually there's another whole value that I bring as an analyst in capturing that experience and connecting the experience to the facts. So we start elevating to a different level and actually using humans for what only humans can do, and allow, the mining to do what humans cannot do. I mean, just for a second, let's be really, really clear. A human cannot do what a process mining tool does. I've got a cartoon that I use often where I've got, people working on a white Post-it notes and brown paper. And I use the image that I used from some workshops I delivered years ago. And I've superimposed R2-D2 and C3PO. And what I say is, the funny thing is when I run the workshop, R2-D2 and C3PO don't appear to be overly communicative. They don't appear to be willing to tell me what they do and how they do it. So actually, as an analyst, I cannot capture how it's going on within a system without process mining. It's not a, do I need it, don't I need it? If I need to know what's going on and it's been embedded in a system, without mining, I can't do it.
But it's also the other way around, right? Because we have that naive, dare I say, childish idea that the computer will tell us what to do, right? And I have to see an analysis tool that says, oh yeah, tweak this screw and then you're going to be rich, famous, whatever it is, right? Because if it was that easy, everybody would do it. And I see the same thing with GPT and all those other things, which immediately, since a couple of weeks, 300 million people became AI experts, which I found very interesting. So I think people are just hunting for the next big thing and think technology will solve the problem, which I don't think is the case. But going back and I'd like to hop back on the enterprise part of it. Where do you see the vendor market for mining technology go to figure out non-process related aspects of the mining activity?
Well, I think there's a couple of things. One is whether we look at it through the lens of iGrafx, Apromore, or Software AG. All three of those companies are in the lucky position of having the key components, e.g. proper enterprise modeling capability, proper enterprise grade simulation capability, and full cross-system process mining that's not tied to a single vendor, which means that all of those can bring in the holistic picture. Now, there's a piece missing because none of those vendors actually do task mining, and maybe in a minute we should spend a moment or two talking about that nasty split between task mining and process mining, because that will guarantee be confusing some of our listeners. But having those pieces together means that we can start to make those holistic decisions around where do we go without an axe to grind, in mixing up the facts with the feelings, with the insights, with the recommendations, with the monitoring and the insights. I mean, Roland and I, must have been last year we were talking, is that because I'm a dinosaur, you know, and we hear all these people talking about process mining being brand new technology, but because I'm a dinosaur, I was there at the very beginning when Software AG or IDS first introduced process mining, and they first introduced, indeed, when we look at some of the stuff that people look at as web interfaces now, and the portal that was introduced, and it was incredible technology that if they put the same thing out today, people would be going, wow, that's evolutionary. It was done years ago, which allowed me to look at my dashboard as a line of business manager, and I could do typical business intelligence, drilling up, drill down, looking at my KPIs and performance, so the process performance management. And I can say, well, you know what? I've got a problem over here, which would allow me to then drill down. Say, now I need to go into the model that underpins that and do the analysis. And it was great the way that the process portal absolutely had those things together. And only vendors with that holistic approach can enable us to achieve those things.
It was just too early, 2001, because people think process mining started in 2010, which is not true, as you know. And at that point in time, being at IDS at that point in time was like, oh yeah, we need to model our processes for the SAP implementation that we have to do. Leave me alone with all that other stuff. I've worked with one customer, the German Armed Forces, because that was a large enough program, who actually said, no, we want this. We want to measure the performance. And the silly example that we said is like, yeah, we need to know how long does it take for facility management to mow the grass on all the locations that you have, so that we know how many resources we need. And if it's not in the database, then you don't get money for this next year. Dear organization, how do you like that?
Yeah, so I totally get it. So the other part of your question, just to show that I didn't ignore the question, I'm not a politician, is... I'm
used to that, Mark, don't worry.
Is that I'm always keeping a weather eye open on two other areas. And so adjacent markets that, we and our listeners should be keeping an eye on. One, business intelligence, because as we start to get into enterprise mining, I think we start to have to watch and see when are we going to see an increasing connectivity, overlap, merging, because when we think about process mining tools, often either some of those tools will rely on third-party BI vendors for their visuals, or they will have very poor visuals, which would be enhanced by taking a BI approach. So there's going to come a point when we do enterprise mining that says, well, hang on, we're mining process rules. And well, if we're going to mine data, well, don't we already do that? So that's one to watch. And the other area is workforce productivity platforms. And very few people are looking at workforce productivity and the overlap between the process mining and the workforce productivity.
So fully agreed on the first one, 100%. I'm curious about the second. So my question will be for the second, but just to put my 2 cents on it, I found it, and I know why they do it. I found it interesting that some vendors say, no, you just need process mining, nothing else. Because what they do is they ignore a fully established, mature part of organizations. You know, people have spent time, effort to build up all the capabilities of connectivity, analysis, dashboarding, whatever they need to do. And you go in there and say, oh, I got that fancy technology that will replace all of that. Oh, and by the way, you've done 5 projects and now you have to stand up a COE with 20 people to manage my super expensive software. I don't think that this is a successful path going forward. In my mind, and I know that our friends at Mining Your Business will disagree with me, in my mind, it's a collaboration. With process mining, you deliver a puzzle piece, you know, a part of the picture. But organizations need to see the full picture, right? And that is the challenge. But I'd like to come back to that second part that you said, productivity tools. Can you elaborate a little bit on that? Because I have not encountered that in the past.
No, and I'm not surprised because it touches on what I was talking about, the process mining, task mining overlap. So the first thing I wanted to say is that in case it's confusion for our listeners and advice that we want to give them is don't confuse task mining and process mining. There are many people that do process mining that say they mine tasks, but they don't have a task mining engine. And unfortunately, there are many task mining vendors out there that will tell you that that's actually process mining. So it's not. It's doing something different. So let's be clear. We can either mine a system and capture a model of what's going on inside a system or across multiple systems, process mining. Or we can capture how we or others interact with a computer system, how we type keys, what systems. Right. So that's a human to system scenario. That's task mining. If you're able to start putting those things together to form a process, then you're going to be pretty lucky for the most part. I'm not saying you can't do it, but for the most part, it would be very, very accidental. And by the way, it's really, really hard because I don't know about you guys or anyone else listening, but I'm working typically on a whole bunch of different things at once. And if someone thinks their screen recorder can actually work out when I'm in Chrome or when I'm in Safari as to what that means I'm actually doing and how to allocate my time to any of those tasks, then, hey, this would be great.
if you go down the screen recording route, but I also see people who follow the document structure, right? You might remember innovative firms, and unfortunately, I don't know if they still exist, like Siteworks, who said, yeah, we can do the screen recording, but that's not the way how we do task management. We look at the URLs, we look at all those structural things, and then we recreate the task from it, which I don't know if that is task mining 2.0 or whatever, but there's different approaches to skim the cat.
Well, I would argue that, okay, so for people that do things like URL, they may not be doing screen capture, but they still have to be capturing key logs. Because just because I'm on an URL of SAP, you don't know what case I'm working on. You don't know whether I'm working on accounts payable because it's the same URL. So they have to be capturing something else. And their two choices are going to be keys or screen. Now,
or both.
Interesting, or both. And that's what now the interesting thing about the key logging, just a little piece of advice for anyone that's reading anything and thinking about doing it is, find me the keylogger that captures on my Mac. Because actually, a lot of these task mining products, in the small print will mention that it works on your Windows laptop because it's directly tied into Windows calls and relies only on some Windows apps that use that particular structure. So there's a lot of ifs and ands and buts there. The technology is good and it works. I'm a fan of the combination of the keys and the screens because I think that's there. But now to come back to the other piece of the jigsaw. So if I'm creating recordings of users sat at a desktop, I may be recording that because I want to go and program my bot or program a system or create a mashup a la traditional style BPMS that says, wow, I could give the user one quote system that means they don't have to jump from 3 different systems. Actually, all I'm giving them is one input screen that's when they hit enter still populates SAP over here and Salesforce over there. I'm just hiding it. It's not actually a system. It's just an interface, which is great. But what I'm actually doing is capturing what people are doing, how they're spending their time. Oh, hang on a minute. That's something that workforce productivity tools also capture. Now so that's where there's the overlap there saying, oh, well, actually, I could be using this for onboarding. I could capture my expert claim handler and replay that for my new claim handler. Wow. So I can use it for onboarding. I can use it for learning. I can use it for training. I can use it for measuring productivity. So there's a whole lot there about workforce performance management that overlaps, notwithstanding that if we think process mining has a few challenges on implementation, e.g. around data connectivity, primarily in data engineering, then we all know that that's nothing compared to the political impacts of persuading our employees that Big Brother isn't really watching everything you do and that we do have this don't watch list of URLs and you can totally trust us that we're not tracking what you do. Yeah, right. Okay, so let me get this right. You've got a task recorder running that's not capturing what I'm doing on Facebook because it's an excluded URL. At the same time as your company policy information says everything that you do on a work laptop has and will be logged elsewhere. So hang on a minute. You've got the IP. You know what I've been doing. It goes all over the place. But let me come back to that business intelligence piece. So Roland, you said, great, we need a combination. And you're right, because, when we're driving the car, we need to see where we're going. Process mining, not as mining, but as predictive. So we've got monitoring, we've got prediction. So, I think it's a lot like driving an autonomous vehicle or, as we move towards autonomy in a vehicle. But we also want to be able to see what's going on behind. So we need to be able to look in the rearview mirror. So in my opinion, and I know it's not a purist view and we'll get a whole bunch of response, I'm sure, from BI people. But for me, BI is like looking in the rearview mirror. Whereas the process intelligence tends to be focusing more on where I'm going. Now, the fact is, I need both. But the BI stuff is fascinating because, haven't those guys already done a lot of the integrations? So if data engineering and data integration is a challenge for process mining, are there not people in the BI area that have solved a part of that problem? And I say a part because they've dealt with the connectivity, they've got the permissions. They still don't know how it works, right? Because we know that one of the challenges around data engineering isn't connecting my process mining software to my SAP or other ERP system, but is actually, do I know what the process should look like? Because this thing's just saying X, then Y, then Z. But is that the process? Or isn't it the process?
Yeah, if at all. I think and you know that because you and I worked on that topic. I think, and I'd like to dish a little bit our competition. What I see is a lot of process mining vendors doing the same exercises that BI vendors did like 10, 15 years ago. They try to build in ETL capabilities into their tools. Right, which I think is not only a waste of time and a waste of money because that technology has been invented, right? There are visual data modeling tools out there that do a much better job than whatnot, but they also do their users a disfavor, right? How many regular mere mortals do know SQL or process query language, or however that you call it, right, to do data transformation? How do you do that in a way that you don't lose your core constituents who should use your tool? And in my mind, the better way is to say, no, we're going to assemble a tool chain that uses the already existing features, those tools that have a bunch load of training available and documentation and whatnot, and don't reinvent the wheel. And I think we will see this within the near future, where software vendors will drop their nonsense and say, no, we're going to use whatever, an Alteryx, a Nime, or whatever the tool is.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple of things there. I mean, from an Apromore perspective, done a lot of the stuff on the ETL, taken a no-code approach, which makes it easier. Doesn't make it easy. Note the word easier, because it is still difficult. We've still got the, do you have permissions? Are you allowed to access this? Do you have all security clearance? How do we limit, etc.?
Do you understand the logic?
Exactly.
Yes.
But I also was going to shout out a vendor, in fairness, just so we're shouting out someone that is outside of our scope. And I was going to give a shout out also to Alteryx, which I think does a very nice job of enabling people to build those visual pipelines for data ingestion and making it pretty easy to actually do those things. But, it's like we've got those skills. So here's another piece of advice maybe for the listeners. So even if you're doing mining separately from BI, and that's okay, still go and talk to the data engineers within your BI group, because they can probably more regularly walk you through how to get the data that you want than anybody else in the organization. It's easier than going to the security team, the data modeling, all the other data people. Go to the BI team because they've dealt with this before. Yes,
they solved those baby teething problems 5 or 10 years ago.
Well, I was thinking more of the cultural ones inside, because the cultural ones inside your organization.
Oh, true. That's true.
And particularly when you're talking about like performance analysis, that's when a lot of cultural issues come up. I mean, what you mentioned a while ago really had me thinking about a lot of cultural challenges I've seen with task mining in organizations. As much as there's a technology you need to bring up, as much as there's data and security you need to be aware of, there's just the practice of what a company does and whether or not people are used to and accepting of it. And particularly when you're looking at task mining as a part of the pipeline to make decisions, you need to be aware of the observer effect. I remember I worked with a company for whom we implemented both process and task mining, and the observer effect essentially made our task mining component not meaningless, but really misleading, because under observation, we had different behavior from our end executors. And there's an ethics question I wanted to talk to you about there as well before we close out the episode, because I want to get your thought on observation ethics, because it is obviously data quality wise better to observe silently, but unethical in a lot of books to do so. And when you're looking at process and task mining, what do you think the obligation of the Center of Excellence or practitioners who are introducing it is to their constituency for notification, for data feedback, and for input in the implementation? What do you think their obligation is there?
Wow. So I think that it's such a big issue that I think that what I should probably do is to put that question in via ChatGPT and have it come back and tell me that there is no ethical problem. There are no issues. Just keep feeding me the information and you can trust me.
But I am just an AI. I have no opinions on this.
No, but exactly. AI tells us we can trust it. There are big issues and big questions there. And I don't think we know all the answers. I don't think we even know all the questions yet. I mean, you're right that there's the silent observer. It's less of a challenge, I think, in process mining because we're capturing the system. So we're capturing what has happened and we can sample inordinate amounts of data. So I think that the observer effect is less relevant in process mining because actually it's observing what has happened. and what has happened 60% of the time or 70% of the time. Or even if I want to go and question, if I take the ABBYY approach, where they think about it less of traditional process mining and think about it as case mining and drilling into the individual case. If I come to you and say, hey, this case shouldn't have been paid, it didn't meet a 4 eyes principle, and I put it in front of you, then you can't deny it. If you did something wrong, it's the fact. I'm coming to you to discuss. Now, do I have a normal human managerial responsibility that says, rather than accusing you, that I actually come and actually ask you, that says, it appears that you didn't on this occasion use the 4 eyes principle. Can you explain to me why this wasn't the case? In other words, don't assume that you've screwed up, but let me ask you the question. So it's those kind of things. For task mining, absolutely, we have got to deal with those issues. And it's a world issue, because there are certain geographies, shall we say, where the idea of monitoring the heck out of everyone is perfectly okay. There are other countries and other cultures that's an absolute no-no. So it's part of the reason that there's no single answer.
Wait, are you saying everything is different than here in America? Come on, Mark. But I think this is a whole topic for another podcast episode. The ethics around what do we do in the analysis? What do we capture? How do we use AI? All that type of stuff. That's a complete different beast. And unfortunately, we're getting close to the hour of our self-imposed limit. As you know, we're always thinking about, okay, we plan for 30 minutes, we hope for 45, and then we end up at 60. So what I like to do is I like to give us a little break before we wrap up the show. And I also obviously want you, dear listeners, give you a couple of triggers to say, okay, think about what you've seen in your organization. How do you harmonize the human experience with the data that you discover from enterprise mining? Or what technology and practice have you tried or put in place and that gave you valuable recommendations for your business transformation, or not? Why? We'll leave you alone for a couple of seconds, and then we come back with part 3.
I gotta get out of here. I gotta get out of here. I'm climbing up the walls. I gotta get out of here. I live in a basement apartment.
And we are back for the last part of our show. We summarize a little bit of what we've heard and say goodbye to our lovely listeners. So in the past hour or so, we've covered a little bit on process and enterprise mining, on what it means process versus task mining at a high level, the human observation and all of the concerns around that, a holistic approach to business mining, and the life cycle that's necessary to make that come to life. Like some of the key vendors and how their approaches differentiate themselves and help you and your organization get to your goal of lasting and sustainable process transformation. And then some of the ways to get started, how to think about it and how to evolve the business and your practice to make it work. And at the end, we've dipped a little bit of our toe into the ethics of observation. Definitely a topic for a future episode.
But now the ultimate question is, obviously, after this very interesting conversation, how can I get in contact with Mark? How can I read more about all the stuff that he wrote, and how do I learn more about him? So, Mark, what is the best way to reach you and learn more about you and your thinking?
I guess the easiest way is to just look me up on LinkedIn, or you can send me an email at mark@markmcgregor.com. Either way, happy to interact and share other information if people want it.
And of course, we would put the links in the show notes so that you don't have to type while driving,
Always a public service announcement. Keep safe, but do listen to What's Your Baseline. And speaking of listening to What's Your Baseline, a huge thank you to all of our listeners who have made all these episodes go by so swiftly. We've seen such amazing feedback, so many people logging on in, listening to these thoughts from some of the thought leaders we've had the pleasure of speaking to. Mark, it was such a fantastic day to just chat about some of these topics, and we'd love to in the future have you back. So that is a call to action to all of our listeners. Keep your eyes and ears on whatsyourbaseline.com, where you'll find much more information about this show, including a full set of show notes at whatsyourbaseline.com/episode 48. And hopefully we'll see you in future episodes with lots of topics to come. If you have any feedback or suggestions, we're always open to getting it through hello@whatsyourbaseline.com, or connect with us on LinkedIn. Leave us a note. We love interacting with our audience. But until then, friends, I've been J.M. Erlinson.
I'm still Mark McGregor.
And my name is Roland Volt.
And we will see you in the next one.